So, I'll be, all right. So, so I think last week we were still talking about allowed namespaces, and we said that allowed namespaces, or the concept of how we'll share buckets. And as of last week, the resolution was for alpha. We don't need to do anything for allowed namespaces or bucket sharing because it's
Hey,
possible manually.
Sid, before you get into technical details, I think we need to sort out some other things because I know that we are kind of auto tree, but in general, I think there are some deadlines for all the other caps. Like today is the day for you to get the PRR section filled out. I just noticed that you don't have that.
Oh yeah.
There was one file you should, yeah, today you should just get everything added there and pin the person, whoever you added as your PR reviewer.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, just at least just this is something they're going to check, right? Another thing is, I think the release team has been inconsistent on how they label this type of caps because last time when I asked them,
Hmm.
and then there were some discussions, and then there was one person in that thread saying, "Oh yeah, the outer tree, uh, but it's tracked, then you still get the benefit of being block or something." And this
Hmm.
time I was double check with the person who is the new release lead, and he was like, if you're not following those deadlines, then basically you are not even doing all of those like blocks. Like what? This is not what I heard last time. I always went back and forth with
Understood.
him, and so I think it's no good.
I see.
So what?
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
don't think we can actually meet the deadline, right? Because it's really next Thursday. You actually have to get the cap merged, but we still have not got Tim. Have you got him to respond?
I email him every day.
He
Just
has
no
not.
response. No
No
response.
response.
Yeah, no response. So, Shing, that's the biggest bottleneck that's there right now. It is just getting a review.
Yeah.
This is the same as last
So,
time.
so I have added the API review labels. At least now this is tracked.
Okay.
Um, I mean, because they do have like people who are tracking all of those caps that require API review. So I see Jordan actually added this one to their table to have this project tracking, project board basically. So
Hmm.
this at least is there. Yeah.
Did Tim explain why he hasn't been able to review yet?
But the problem is
Is
he
he not
didn't
like?
respond. Looks like he didn't even respond. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I worry that like maybe having read it once and maybe having a bad taste in his mouth, he doesn't want to read it again. And if there, what we can do to overcome that, maybe we need someone else that he trusts to give it a look and tell him it looks a lot better. Because if he's not
So
even responding,
last time I also asked Assad to him. Maybe we should actually
So,
send
so,
Assad
so,
email again.
yeah.
Hey,
So the
I see that Maurice here is on call. I wonder if he can actually help Maurice here. I'm not sure if he's
Yeah.
because you work at Google, so you have some internal connections. So we are actually just trying to get Tim to review this cap again, but we couldn't get him to respond. I'm not sure if you have any internal communication channel kind of get his attention.
Oh, from Seth?
So so this is one actually is mainly Tim, the API reviewer. But if you can pin Sad, that'll be fine too. If Sad can go pin Tim, that'll be fine too. If you can find Sad, because I did ask Sad last time in our last week's SIG storage meeting. I asked him if he can
Mhm.
pin Tim, and he said yes. But of course, he's busy. If you can help, maybe if you can help pin Sad and ask Sad to pin Tim to review this cap. Do you know this new cap? Sid, can you add that?
Yeah, it's 2813. I'm sharing the link.
Yeah, add that in the chat, and maybe
Mhm.
Marisa, if you can help.
Yeah, sure.
So to Ben, one of the things you said, I think that's possibly true. Where Tim feels like this thing is off the mark. So he, probably thinks there's a lot that needs to be changed and he needs to review it from scratch. So that's one of the reasons we rewrote it from scratch. The other thing is we didn't even get a review last time, even before he read it for the first time. We got
So
about
I wonder, should we actually schedule a review meeting with the SAD? And also Andrew has not been here for quite a long time because he was actually quite involved in the beginning. And then,
yeah,
so
but
so
we
Maricia,
shouldn't
are
be-
you the one who is kind of like looking, I mean, helping in this area, like help review the CAP or what do you think? Somebody else in your team can review it?
Yeah. Typically the ones that review CAPs are Jing, Michelle, and Sad.
Right. So this one actually, because Michelle is overloaded on the CSI side, so she has not been involved. So Sad was actually involved in the beginning. So maybe actually, so Sid, I wonder maybe we should actually just reach out to Sad and try to schedule a meeting with him first.
I mean,
And
I
in the
think
same meetings, inviting Tim. I'm not sure what else to do.
but we need to send the message that like we're effectively being pocket vetoed by just being ignored.
Yep.
And like if that's what they want, that's fine. But like I would be very surprised if that's what they want. So maybe there's miscommunications and everyone expects someone else to do it. I don't know, but like just the fact that you haven't heard back even like a reason why he hasn't read it, or like I'll read it next week kind of a response, tells me that like we should be worried.
That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. No, you're right, Ben. We need to clearly communicate that you know we're being we're being ignored, and yeah,
And we're on a path to nowhere, like
absolutely.
unless unless something changes.
So the thing is, if yeah, that's an issue, but after we do everything right, and if we still get ignored, then then it's the ball is in their court at that point. We can easily raise an issue, and I think we're already there, more or less. But if there isn't even a review by the end of this release cycle, then we can really raise some alarms saying, hey, what's going on? Um, uh, Especially because we would have done all the things right, and they dropped the ball. Um, so and if they can refer us to a different reviewer, I would be fine with that, because I understand Tim has already gone through it once, and it'll be easier if he reviewed it now because he has some context. But if he doesn't even review, wouldn't that be worse than getting another reviewer who starts from scratch? Um,
Well, the
so
problem is I don't really know, any other reviewers. The only ones that I know have been reviewing is, but Jordan is another one, and then I think Clayton sometimes chimes in. But I mean, for them, it's also brand new. If you want to, I don't know if Jordan, he might at this point they may all be kind of overloaded at this point.
Yeah, but I think even if we do that, we'll have to coordinate with Tim just in case, because what if he starts?
Oh, yep.
We're losing you, Sid.
Wasting someone's time. We don't want to.
Sid, could you say that again?
No, I was saying even if we end up getting the review from Jordan or asking him to look at it, we want to make sure we let Tim know that that's what we're doing, because if Tim
can you
starts
actually, what you can do is, since he just actually added this to the tracking board, can you just on the cap, can you just pin Jordan just to see if he can take a look just on that cap?
Yeah, I'm
just assign that to him as well. If he doesn't like it, he can do assign himself. What about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
What? Hey guys, this is Luis. When is the? How you doing? When is the date due? I'm just writing it down.
Well, so I think, okay, so this is another tricky part. The problem is the release team. So this one, I think we can't really make the deadline. The deadline is actually next Thursday for the cap merge.
Wow.
But the last time what we did was we actually, because last time we also missed the deadline, right? So we asked the release team, this was actually Tim was the one who came up with this. He said, well, everything you do is auto tree. Can we just, we don't have to follow that. So we actually asked the release team, they say, yeah, you can do this tracked, but auto tree, and there is a category. This way, it's still tracked. So you don't have to follow the deadline and that, but you may still get the benefit of like writing a blog of something, for some attention. So we said, oh, that's perfect for us, right? But the funny thing is that this time when there was a new release lead, I'm asking him again, and he's like, oh, if you want us to track, then you still have to follow all the deadlines. Otherwise, you don't get blocks. I actually even showed him the old thread, and he's repeating that to me again. I'm like, okay, I'm giving up. So they keep changing because every release they have a different person to be the release lead, and then they give you something different. So, but anyway,
Shing, I'm trying to understand what you're saying about what Tim's response from earlier when he suggested we do things out of tree. Does part of that include?
He was saying that we don't have to follow the cap merge deadline. Remember last time was because we were
right,
out of 1.22.
Was he suggesting we don't need an API review, at least, or not?
No, he doesn't say we don't. He would just say we don't have to follow the deadline. If we don't want to do the API review, that means we need to change the API group. He said that, right? He said that, but Sad was saying no, right? So we still want this API to be a SIG storage API. If we change this to any other group, like our own object.
Right, but is the theory that like the review should be postponed until later, or that it still needs to happen?
Basically, just saying that the review you don't. So okay, so this is the thing. If we want this API to be in SIG storage API group, then we must have an API review to review it. What Tim was saying is just that, okay, since you're auto tree, you don't have to follow the cap merge deadline. So this way it gives us more time.
Why does it need to be part of the SIG storage API group?
That's because if you want this one to be supported by SIG storage, that's what Sad said. Otherwise, we can do whatever we want, but that was then what's the reason for us to be a sub project under SIG storage, right? This was previously using a different repo, right?
And we start with alpha being separate and then bring it in after?
No, we are not alpha yet. We're still trying to be alpha.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
In alpha, can we say we're in a different API group since it's alpha anyway?
No, then that's not official, right? We can do whatever we want, but that's not, then SIG storage is not going to recognize that. That's all. Yeah, we can do whatever we want. We can say, oh, we go alpha, but then it's not we don't recognize it as a SIG storage sub project. But I think that's what we wanted. We want this one to be part of a SIG storage. That's when it has to be, in that group, and then that needs a review, API review.
Okay. Just trying to see if we could remove some roadblocks. Okay.
Yeah, I think tracked auto tree is fine. I mean, we can do. I think I forget about what the release lead was saying. I think we can always submit a blog ourselves, because you see that people submitting blogs in Kubernetes blog area anyway. So it may not be like part of the 1.23 release. If they don't allow us, we can still try. If they don't allow us, we can always submit a blog there. So it will still be a Kubernetes blog. So I think we don't have to, just to get stressed on that one. The bottom line is we need to find the API reviewer first.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Luis, I think your question on chat was just answered in the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. Perfect, guys. I wrote it down on the minutes.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so Shing, there's another question I have. So on the cap, Jordan has written. I'll quickly show you. Jordan has written.
He has already responded. What did
added this to assigned in API.
Yeah. If you click that API reviews, they have a tracking board, just like we have a project tracking board for CSI, right? Yeah. So this way, I think the API machinery has this tracking board, so they know that what are the caps are being reviewed.
Got it.
Yeah. Actually, if you look at because most of them have multiple people reviewing, so yeah, it's fine. We'll have both Jordan and Tim there.
Okay. Yeah, and Jordan doesn't seem to have any others.
No, he is. I know he's reviewing. There was at least one cap I was looking at. He's the reviewer. I'm pretty sure Jordan is normally very, very busy. He's reviewing a lot of stuff.
That's Jordan, right? No, that's not Jordan. Okay. Cool. Good to know. Yeah, we're in the bucket. Okay. Cool. All right. So so going back to the cap, did anyone else get a chance to review the cap?
I will actually do that probably tomorrow. I'm getting back into this project again.
Sounds good. Thank you, Luis. Ben, did you also get a chance to look at it?
No, I had it on my list, and I haven't done it yet.
No worries. Yeah, it'll be good if you can get a word in, um, and it'll also automatically subscribe you to any questions that come up there, and it's generally going to be good if more eyes take a look at it. Um, and Jeff has done a round of detailed reviews, and we feel good about it. I still need to make the changes that Shing mentioned. I'm going to be able to do that today right after the meeting. But anything else, if anyone wants to make sure it looks good, you should take a look and make sure you leave a review sooner rather than later, because the deadline's fast approaching. It would be much appreciated. All right. All right, and Shing, just as a resolution for just to finish up the conversation we were just having. So do we've assigned Jordan, that's one thing. Do we still want to set up the meeting with Saad and Tim and go over the cap with them?
I think that's actually, we should do that because, because we don't know whether Jordan has time right now. It's, I think he must be also very busy at this time. 1 week to go and there's the deadline. Yeah, if we can get Saad and Tim to come back to this, then I think that's good. And maybe Maricia, can you bring this up with Saad?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. So I think that concludes that conversation. Again, highest priority is that right now. And like I was saying earlier, the biggest bottleneck is just getting a review. But yeah, we have a plan now. Okay, so let's get into the technical aspects of where we left off and what's next. So we left off last week saying that we don't really need to support bucket sharing across namespaces in alpha because we can do it manually. That
Well,
was
but right at the end of the call, an issue did come up, which was our plan for brownfield could potentially conflict with the plan for bucket sharing. So, like, yeah, we had that whole alternative for like how you could share a bucket, with either some controller automating the process or someone doing it manually or whatever. But then there was the question of for buckets that were created from outside of Cozy, and we want to start using them with Cozy, what is the process? And if we stick with the old plan of like, well, you just create a you just create a bucket, a B object that points to that, and then you can start creating BARs that point directly to the bucket. You're right back in the original problem of, well, how do you do access control? How do you do allowed namespaces and all that? And so I think we need to also have an opinion on what the brownfield story is, just to make sure that it is compatible with our eventual story for bucket sharing. And I think, based on the conversation last week, that we need to probably say no allowed namespaces and no BARs pointing directly at Bs, because those two things sort of imply each other. Yeah. You can't get rid of one without getting rid of both.
And that's where we kind of came up with this concept of using the BRs as a mechanism to import a bucket eventually.
Right, but if you want to import a bucket and then you want to have it shared across multiple namespaces, the only way to do that under the new scheme is to have lots of Bs and lots of BRs that all point to the same bucket, or to have one B and one BR, but then create all the BARs in one namespace and transfer them to the other namespaces. And both, I don't think I'd be surprised if anyone's happy with either of those options. So I wanted to talk through them and say, like, I don't see a better way than those two options, but like maybe we should just come to peace with they're the only way.
Okay, so let's start by summarizing the bigger problem. So Ben, do you want to go ahead and explain like what we're trying to solve? And
I mean, the bigger problem is, Cozy automates creation of buckets, and that's great, but like there's always going to be situations where you either have buckets that were created outside of Cozy just because they pre-exist, or you want to migrate data in from some bucket that was created by some other cluster, or you want to share a bucket across multiple clusters. I mean, there's a long list of reasons why we can't assume that every bucket was created by Cozy in the local cluster, right? So there has to be a process by which you can take a bucket that simply exists and pull it into the cluster such that Cozy can begin to work with it. In particular, it can create new BARs, or it can take existing BAs and bind them to pods so the pods can access the bucket somehow. And because of the one-to-one binding scheme we've come up with, like any sort of importation of a bucket means you also need a BR in, to point to it, because that's the thing that the BAR is going to point to create new accesses. Unless you also want to force people to sort of manually create BAs and not rely on Cozy to do that either, which is really ugly. So fundamentally, like, we see these things moving across clusters. We see these things coming in from outside the cluster, in addition to the regular simple use case of it's, the entire life cycle is managed by Cozy. And so it's just a question of how do you make that happen? The lowest effort approach is to say, well, it's manual, right? You can create the bucket yourself. You can bind it to the BR yourself. We're not preventing you from doing that, but we're also not making it easy. And like that's a surprisingly useful sort of first step, is just to sort of punt and say, well, you can do it, but we're not helping you. And I guess that's kind of what I'm suggesting we might want to do, but like I want to make sure everyone understands that there are downsides that come with that, and that we're at peace with those downsides. That we're saying we're not going to prevent it, but it is going to be manual, and you will end up in situations where you'll have like duplicate copies of some objects, and you have to deal with the side effects of that.
Isn't that kind of when we first started with PVCs? It's kind of the same model.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. This is basically walking the same path of PVPVC, where if you have a volume that exists outside the cluster, you can create a PV manually. If you want multiple namespaces to have access to that volume, you can make 2 copies of the PV and have 2 PVCs and figure out the ugliness that that's going to cause. Nothing stops you from doing those things. You just have to own the complexity.
I think I'm coming in blind today, but if I was reading a document that described how to do that for alpha, I would be okay with that, as long as it was documented.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, I think the manual, as long as we just explain how it works and say, sorry, it's not easier to do. At least it's deterministic and simple. It's simple in terms of, like, we don't have a bunch of extra machinery on our API to enable these more complex use cases. The API is sort of bare bones, just get you what you need. And then, if you want to do imports, it's manual. It's certainly a model that has worked well in Kubernetes so far.
Yeah, is that part of the KEP? Oh no.
This is the part that's been in the most flux recently, because in the original version of the KEP, we had some specific proposals for handling brownfield bucket or bucket sharing across namespaces, and Tim didn't like it. And so we started exploring other options, and we've been going around in circles on those options for quite some time now. And we had kind of sort of arrived at a solution that we were seeming comfortable with as of last week. But I want to put a nail in the coffin of the allowed namespaces field, and say no. we will not do that. And that means you can't have BARs pointing directly to Bs, which was one of the schemes we had to try to avoid having multiple copies of the same bucket. And I don't like that, but like I don't see another way.
You mean the BR is pointing to the B?
Right. I think it was Jeff that came up with that scheme. I don't know how long ago, and it was very attractive, but it did force us to think about the security implications of that and having some sort of allowed namespaces field, and then everyone started hating that the mechanics of that when we started thinking about, well, how do you actually deal with that, the allowed namespaces field over time. And so the new proposal is to get rid of all of that, but that also means getting rid of the clever scheme where the BAR can point directly at the B and enables that simpler mode of sharing. So I want to sort of put that out there and say, are we okay with not doing that and going back to the even older vision of you just have multiple BRs and multiple buckets that all point to the same thing if you want multiple namespaces to have access to the bucket, the ability to create new accesses to a bucket like BARs.
And we don't want to go back to multiple BRs pointing to the same B. There's all kinds of that locks you in so much on expanding your design for, say, mutation. You have to do weird things to decide who actually owned the bucket. It's so much simpler and cleaner to have a one-to-one mapping between a BR and a B.
No. I'm saying that the BR to B mapping is still one-to-one. It's just that you might end up with multiple Bs that have exactly the same contents because they point to the same bucket.
Yeah,
so
then what do you
think of
if multiple Bs point to the same backend bucket, and you now have to, do you keep the Bs in sync? Do you have a main B and the rest don't matter? I mean, how do you deal with those kinds of situations then?
Wait. So hold on. How do we end up with multiple buckets? I'm kind of lost here.
So if you remember, like, first of all, even in the improved scheme you came up with, if you want to share a bucket across clusters,
Mm-hmm.
you will have multiple Bs that have the same contents, right? That is unavoidable. No one disputes that. So all I'm saying is
Each in a different cluster.
Huh?
Each in a different cluster.
Each in a different cluster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is if you want to have multiple namespaces have access to the same bucket in the sense that they can create new BARs on that bucket, then you will have to do the same thing you do cross cluster, cross namespace, which is create a second B and a second BR and bind them. And that would just be the way you do it. So it's not like it's total heresy because like I said, when you go cross cluster, you have to do this anyways. So it's a problem you can't avoid solving. I'm just saying, like, it simplifies the single cluster cross namespace case to do it the same way, even though so Jeff, to get at your specific concern of which one is the master, if we set it up so that you can't do anything to change them other than delete the bucket, then it only becomes a question of who has the power to delete, and we already have a deletion policy that determines that. So as long as we don't ever get into a situation where we have to do bucket mutation, this is okay. And bucket mutation is a whole other subject that we've tiptoed away from.
I don't think I even buy the argument. I understand the argument, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that you have to have multiple Bs when you're talking about cross-cluster topology versus within a cluster. I see those as being very different. And I think simplifying and making it more intuitive within the boundary of a cluster is still worth doing, even though, like, I agree with you, in multiple clusters, there's going to be some resource cloning, object cloning to support multiple clusters. We've had a couple of versions of KubeFed and other things trying to address that. And to me, it doesn't feel like a strong argument to then jump to the idea that we can have multiple Bs within the same cluster.
Well,
I agree with that, Jeff.
So I share your feeling that, like, it would be nice not to have to do this, but the caution I would add is, like, we can't stop someone from doing this. Like once the APIs are there, you can make two Bs and two BRs that point to the same bucket, and we'll never know that that's what you've done. So like,
I mean,
it's not like,
yeah, but you can do that with a lot of resources. I'm trying to understand.
yeah.
Do we want to try and solve that, make it so foolproof that you know, that we can survive such an event, or do we want to say, you know, if you do that, it's the user's mistake at that point, and we can address it in the future, but is that really an important consideration
What,
for
what,
design at
what,
this stage?
what I want to get to is saying it's not a mistake. It's like, if you do that, we will follow your orders, and you know, and you own the consequences of anything that you do. But like, as far as Cozy is concerned, it's still valid, because I want it to be, you know, simple and deterministic enough that, like, you know, if you have two buckets that point to the same thing, and they're bound to two BRs and two different namespaces, like the logical thing happens.
Yeah, but isn't that yeah, go ahead. I think you want to say something.
I mean,
Finish
I just like when you get to the cross cluster situations, like, this is just what's going to happen. And I've argued strenuously that, like, cross cluster is the key situation where object storage beats file system and block storage, right? It's ideal for sharing data across multiple clusters. And so, like,
So, I mean,
it's almost the most important sharing case from where I sit, is going across clusters. And I just view across namespaces as a degenerate case of that.
no,
Where,
I think that's the wrong way to look at it, Ben. At least in terms of the deployments, they solve the problem very differently. So cross-cluster sharing doesn't happen the way, uh, you know, that we're thinking of it. That is, they don't share the same bucket across clusters necessarily. It's still possible technically, but generally, when they do this cross-cluster thing, it's with bucket replication across regions. So what they do is they replicate a bucket with eventual consistency from one region to another, and it's a different bucket in each of those clusters, except they're kept in sync somewhat, and each cluster talks to the geographically nearest bucket. That's the
yeah.
model that people
So when you go across geographies, I buy that. But like, I envision worlds where you have dozens of Kubernetes clusters in the same region, and like, why would they be accessing different buckets?
So, I mean, this problem, let me put it this way, this problem would also exist if, you know, two different um, clusters wanted to use, say, NFS mount, or two different clusters wanted to, say, reuse, you know, Amazon load balancers. Wouldn't we have the same issue?
Yeah. So if you have an NFS volume and you want to use CSI to bind your pods to it, like, you need to create two different PVs that actually point to the same thing. And it's assumed that when you do that, you're doing things like setting the retention policy to retain and not delete, so that they don't accidentally delete the storage that the other guy's using, right? Like, you just have to be aware when you set up that situation that, you know, you set the delete policy or the retain policy correctly to
Isn't
avoid
that
problems.
isn't that something? Okay, so in buckets we can do the same thing.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Is I don't see buckets as being different than that. Like, you have a bucket, you create a B in one cluster, you set the deletion policy to retain, and then you bind it to a BR so someone can create BARs and get access to it, and then you do the same thing in another cluster, and neither guy can delete the bucket. But when they're, you know, if they want to stop using it, they can delete their BR and the B will go away, and the actual bucket will hang around, which is exactly what you would want. So like, that all feels fine to me. But when you get into, like, okay, now you have two different namespaces in the same cluster, and you want to do the same thing, like, and then we say, well, okay, we're going to come up with some way to avoid having two BRs. Then you open up the can of worms, and I'm trying to. I mean, if you have another proposal that doesn't involve allowed namespaces and BARs binding to Bs that gets us out of this problem, I would like to hear it.
So you're saying the issue is if someone else creates the same bucket instead of reusing or transferring, someone else ends up creating a BR requesting the same bucket. Or do you mean the situation where if someone else creates a brownfield B, a static brownfield B, where they go and create the bucket API object by hand, and it's pointing to the same bucket? Are you
Yeah.
talking about one?
Yeah.
That
I'm talking
second.
about two bucket objects that point to the same physical bucket.
Okay, so the only way to do that is manually,
Right.
right? So at that point, there's no BR
that is
involved.
our brownfield story today, is you do it manually.
Yeah, but there's no BR involved in that second step, in the sense the second way of doing things. You
Right,
just created the bucket.
but once you create the B, if you don't put a BR on it,
Mhm.
you can't use it for
No,
anything.
you can still have BAR pointing to it. That was
Right,
the whole.
but that's what I'm saying. If you have the BAR pointing to it, you need the allowed namespaces scheme, and you're right back in the situation you're trying to get out of. So that's the problem I'm trying to highlight here, is that as long as you try to play that game, you need the allowed namespaces field, and someone you have to deal with updating it and modifying it, and you're back in that situation.
And you're saying that because uh, if because BR has to point to something when it comes to this bucket transfer kind of methodology, or having it point to something, or having some mechanism to say from the namespace where the bucket was created that this can be used somewhere else too, right? Like let's say I
Yeah,
have to.
there has to be a security mechanism. It's either a list of allowed namespaces on the bucket object, or it's the fact that it's bound to a BR in your namespace. Like, those are the only two security mechanisms we have discussed. And so the first one we said we didn't like because allowed namespaces created a bunch of problems. The second one, which is it must be bound to a BR in your namespace, is the one I'm advocating for, but it inevitably means that each one is only usable in one namespace. And so when you want the second namespace, you got to create another copy of everything. So, and I agree with Jeff that is horrible, but like I haven't heard the thing that's not horrible yet.
Yeah, I still am not entirely I think I need to think about this more, but I'm not entirely sure. We do need a security model. What if it's okay to have anyone else just use the bucket, any other namespace?
Well, then your security model is all namespaces, right? That's a policy choice you've made, and that is a valid policy choice to make. You know, if we did go down the path of allowed namespaces, you should be able to put a wildcard in there and say everyone. But I guarantee you there are situations where someone will want to create a bucket and they can create that they want to be able to use to create BARs, and they will want to limit which namespaces can do that.
What if we made a manual process around it? So let's say no allowed namespaces, and for brownfield buckets or regular buckets, and what if we said if someone else wants to access from a different namespace, go through an approval process like it happens with the certificate signing requests. It's manual, and who whichever namespace, if it was created through a BR, whichever namespace created it gets to approve it, or if it was created as a brownfield bucket, then the admin gets to approve it.
Okay, but at the end of the day, like where are those permissions tracked?
In that object, in whichever object that gets approved.
No,
It
but
sounds,
like,
I was just
but
gonna say quickly, it sounds a lot like the PVC movement across namespaces style issue. Again, doesn't
well,
it?
yeah. So Luis, last week we talked about, being able to do bucket transfers or bucket access transfers across namespaces, basically copying that design. And everyone thought it seemed like a reasonably good future approach, not something we would do for V1, but
Got it.
a mechanism that we would eventually use to enable that. So, but what I'm getting at, Sid, with my question is, like, we own the controller that will notice new BARs popping up, and we'll go create BAs. And when we get a BAR popping up that points at a B, what will it consult to know whether it should deny or allow the request?
But why are we putting an access model over it? Is still something. Maybe I forgot about this conversation, but do we even need an access model there? Do we even need something to say, okay, you're allowed, not allowed?
If we don't, then anyone who knows the name of the B object,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean, could conceivably be kept secret, but like it's just an object name, so it's not that secret.
Mm-hmm.
That anyone who knows it can mint new credentials on that bucket and use them in their namespace, and there's no limit on what they can do, right? Any BAC that exists, they can create a BAR, point it at the bucket, and gain that level of access to the bucket merely by knowing the name of the Kubernetes object.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like a security hole.
But isn't that the case with nodes? Say, let's say we have a node where we have say a host path volume that's being managed by a certain particular admin service, and if anyone knows the name of that, they can schedule another pod that goes to the same exact node, to the same exact host path.
You need the PVC to actually access a PV.
Not the
And
same PV. I can create a whole new host path volume, points to the same backend path, right?
but
So
no, to create a new volume, you need to be able to have ability to create PVs, and users don't have that.
no, as a persistent volume claim, you can request a host path volume on that node at that path, the same path as what the admin's already using. So
I didn't think PVCs worked that way.
no, I can have two different PVCs that pointed to two different PVs, each PV pointing to the same host path, and then artificially you schedule the pod to run on the same
Yeah,
node.
but you can't create a PVC for host path volumes and like specify the path. Like that's not how it works. You can specify a pod that directly has a host path volume, but like there's no PVC involved in that. That's just kubelet creating a volume. But that's outside of CSI, outside of everything.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
And that requires the pod security policy allowing you to do that, which by default it doesn't. And there's
right,
a bunch
that's
of
what I was getting to. No, that's what I was getting to. Okay, so first question is, see, we don't restrict something like that from happening. Why do we have to restrict buckets from being shared? If someone wants to be a bad actor, I it's the cluster admin's responsibility to make sure that it's used correctly. I think we might be trying to solve a problem that is much ahead of us. I don't know if we should start by designing uh, an access model inherent in how buckets are accessed. Like when a BAR points to B, I think it should just be allowed. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and can I just add something? I mean, there's RBAC rules, so you could prevent users and namespaces from creating a BAR. And it sounds like, Ben, what you're getting at is we want something more granular than that. You want to allow someone to create a BAR in some instances, but not create a BAR that directly references a B.
Right. You need a way to discriminate between like, is he allowed to use cozy at all? You're right. You can use RBAC to prevent someone from using cozy at all and just say, you may not create BARs, period. But the moment you let them create BARs, like they're going to be able to do this if they know the bucket name. And so you'd like to be able to distinguish between the user that is all powerful and create BARs that point to anything versus the user that can't use cozy versus a middle ground where you're allowed to create buckets. You're allowed to create BARs for buckets that you own, but not for other people's buckets, right? And how do you know that you're in that third situation?
There's Sid and I had a discussion earlier this week, and I learned something, and from his research and experience, Sid, you go ahead and add it, but most of the users that are creating BRs and BARs are going to be a DevOps, not the app writer. So, and the DevOps is a more trusted user. Sid, do you want to elaborate more on what you were telling me?
Yeah, at least with Minayo, and I work with a whole bunch of customers, and overwhelmingly the pattern is, um, the application developer has no insight into how even these Kubernetes resources are made or managed, and it's the DevOps person, or the sysadmin, that brings this together, the application and the resources it needs. Where we are getting at is, the DevOps person is, or the sysadmin, is more trustworthy than an application by itself. So even if an application is potentially harmful or a bad actor, they're not going to directly request these resources. It's going to be provisioned by the admin. So who's more trusted?
Thanks. This is Guy.
Mhm.
I don't know if but I think what this comes down to is that you're saying it's an admin. So if it's an admin, it can create the buckets anyway. We're not talking about self-service anyway. I think the entire thing is the tension between self-service of users, not admins and DevOps,
No.
and
So we're getting at, yeah. So one thing to add there, guy, is we're saying users should the DevOps should be able to just use a bucket if needed. We don't want to put an access model in there. Um,
No, it's okay, but then it can create, just like Ben is saying, if it's a DevOps and it gets, and the RBAC rules allow it to create a B, it can create the B and the VR. And I mean, it's an equivalent API. It's not that the API really changes, may becoming more explicit a little bit, that you have to create more objects to get to the same point. But I think what I'm hearing from Ben is that he prefers to to lose the self-service capability, where every tenant, every user of a namespace can really get a self-service of a bucket, of a connection to a bucket, and keep the cozy protocol, the cozy APIs more portable, right? So that you don't have to have these cases where you list namespaces within your Bs or things around these things where you have some references outside to the external buckets somehow. Where we had also these suggestions where you just reference the external bucket directly from the requesting, like the BAR or BR or whatever. So I think it's like a service versus portability thing. That's what I'm hearing. Is that how you look at this?
what's the portability part, Ben? Go ahead.
Allowed namespaces, for example.
The use case that I have in mind is kind of a blend where you have an admin driven sort of bucket import from outside the cluster, right? Because I guess creating the cluster resource requires elevated privileges, but then once the bucket is known, you want to go to self-service in terms of who has access and who can connect to it and all of that. That's what the BAR pointing to the B sort of indicates, is someone had to create that B, and that was someone with elevated privileges. But anyone can create BARs, and so those are self-service. And if you're going to end up in a situation where there's security risks, and I don't want to keep burning up time on this. So like if everyone is of the opinion that the security doesn't matter and we just want to move on, I will stop harping on it. But I feel strongly that there is a security issue and it has to be addressed eventually. And I don't know what the answer is.
So
I agree with you. I don't think it makes sense to just have the only one option where the every credential minting just works. This is, I mean, it's just not a multi-tenant capable API, right? It just means there's no self-service. That's what it means anyway.
So okay. So you the security problem you're defining it as, so what Guy is saying is, for if you're going to build a multi-tenant system, this is not it. But the security problem that we're really looking at is that there can be bad actors that we don't know of, in different namespaces and other namespaces that can mess up my data, right? That's the security problem we're trying to solve. So we only want trusted people to have access to the bucket, correct?
But yeah, so the nightmare scenario is Alice creates a BR and goes through the dynamic provisioning process of getting a B, and then she starts using the bucket. And then Bob learns the name of Alice's B, and he goes and creates his own BAR and gets access to Alice's bucket, and then begins deleting all the data in it, or modifying the data. And all he needed to perform that attack was to know the name of the bucket, and that's pretty creepy.
Yeah. And you put it that way. Yeah. So let's go back to that one other question that we had, which is this concept of multiple buckets being unavoidable for the same backend bucket. So isn't that kind of an exceptional situation, as in it can only happen if someone goes and creates a B that points to an existing backend bucket? Is that right? Within a cluster.
Sorry, say that again.
So my question is, so this whole conversation started with the context of us not being able to avoid, or the situation where we'll have multiple buckets pointing to the same backend bucket being an unavoidable one, right?
Well, or you need some explicit security mechanism like allowed namespaces. That's where we started a couple months ago, right? We came up with that scheme because we were trying to avoid the multiple buckets, and I pointed out there's a security problem that somewhere someone needs to know what is allowed and what's not allowed. And allowed namespaces was the best we could come up with, but gradually we started to like it less and less, and so we sort of tried again with another approach to say maybe we do bucket sharing a different way and to get rid of allowed namespaces.
I see. So okay, we're almost out of time, but let's sit on it. It seems like we're back at square one, but I do understand the problem.
I mean, the nice thing about having multiple copies of objects and saying you can only use your namespace copy is then the security mechanism is you have to have a bound object in your namespace, right? And that's just, which is how everything else in Kubernetes works, right? Like a pod can only refer to a PVC that's in the same namespace. You can only refer to a config map that's in the same namespace. You can only use secrets that are in the same namespace. And because the namespaces basically are the security mechanism. So given that that's how everything else works in Kubernetes, I feel like it makes sense to say a BAR can only point to a BR that's in the same namespace. And there's your security mechanism. But as long as BARs have the one-to-one binding, you end up inevitably with this multiple copies of the bucket at the end of the day when you want to share.
And that's a fair argument, but at the same time, user resources like pods point to cluster-wide resources like storage classes. So
yes, and I think this is why Tim, so many months ago, suggested maybe we need a cluster-wide resource for buckets that are intended to be shared, and maybe we're going to keep going in circles until we go there.
I know.
Yeah, it's possible.
I would like to think more about this. Not just some time to. I think you bring up a really good concern, Ben. And I've never been a big fan of allowed namespaces, even though I helped promote that idea. I it's never felt good to me. So yeah. I'm okay trying to dig deeper for a solution.
And for what it's worth, I think what Ben is suggesting is flexible enough so that we can add, any provider can add a controller that does, something similar to allowed namespaces, if that's what the provider wants to. And, just that controller would create those on demand and things like that. So I don't see it as a problem to extend, right? It's, I'm not sure if what we should do now is like spend a few more months on getting
but the fundamental the fundamental decision we can't punt on is like, can a BAR point directly to a B? Because that's our controller that we have to write, and that's our
so
API
we can say no.
code
I think it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to say no, and lead to another controller that would import, like, copy the B, and that's it. And do whatever it wants to keep it in sync or not, or we just keep it out of scope from Cozy to say that Cozy just makes sure that you have once you have your namespace objects, your pods work with it, and your you can do greenfield with it, and you can delete you can do the deletion path and all that if needed.
Yeah, maybe we need sharing policy in a second release, and a controller that watches BARs and then enforces the sharing policy. But anyway, it sounds like, Guy, you're saying we don't need to solve it at the beginning. Ben, you're saying yes, but we would need to remove the BAR dot spec bucket name field. And then that sort of locks it out. And then we say we don't have sharing across namespaces for alpha.
No, we do have it, but it doesn't even have to be manually. You can write a controller that does it. We're just saying it's not included in the
but it would be done by having 2 BRs and 2 Bs.
Yeah,
like that, right?
And
and then you can remove the bucket name.
Problem. So what is the BR? How do you get sharing just because you have a BR? So what's the BR say?
2 BRs pointing to the same B.
No, 2 BRs pointing to 2 different Bs that have the same.
Yeah, 2 different Bs. Sorry, that point to the same.
Back to the original design where then we're cloning Bs, and we don't know what the main B is, and we don't have a solution.
But we're not saying you should do that. We're just saying that we can't prevent you from doing that. And so if you do it, it's going to work. But we don't like it.
Okay, so we're out of time. Unfortunately, I have a hard stop today. Let's continue next week. Ben, and I do understand the concern, and I think everyone here does. Yeah, but for now, the proposal still says the BR points to the B for bucket sharing. But we can always go and fix that and change it even after alpha. So let's keep going with what we have, because we don't have a resolution or consensus on what the better approach should be. Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for we'll remember not to just stick with this approach, and we'll make sure that we address the problem correctly.
If anyone wants to write up a quick proposal in a Google Doc and post it on SIG Storage Cozy, I would definitely review it and read it. I'm interested I need more time to see something in front of me than just hearing all the different conversations. That's just
a good suggestion. Yeah. All right. Yeah, please, Ben, if you have I don't think I think it might be a good idea to explore having a namespace B and a global B for sharing.
Maybe so.
Yeah, if someone wants to put that in a proposal, please do so. Yeah, okay, so we're out of time again. Thank you, everyone. Let's meet again next week. And Ben and Guy and Vianney, if you get a chance, everyone here really, please review the KEP and leave your feedback there.